a rich man's world. I have turned the soul of this beautiful land.
Hey everyone, Angus here with Iron Bolt Fly Shop. Today we're going to be tying up a Guide's Choice variant. Typically I'll fish this fly usually in the summertime. You can fish it in the winter, you can fish it all year. Great as a dropper, and I think the hot head or the hot spot gives this fly a little bit more of an advantage than your standard Hare's ear. So today we've got Daiichi 1710 in a size 12, and we've got a gold bead, which would be a 8 with 3.3 millimeter. So for this, I'm just going to start my thread just behind the bead. I'm just going to work it back to about the barb on our hook. So once we get that there, we're going to be tying our tail. For that, we're going to be using a hare's mask. And I'm just going to trim out just a couple guard hairs here. If you want to use squirrel, that also works phenomenally well. So once you get that trimmed out, I'm just going to take it and brush out all of that under fur. Just makes it easier to tie in. You can take out a little bit from the tip if they're not even. So now that we've got those evened out, I like a little bit shorter tail on mine. So we're going to tie that in just on top of our hook shank. And we're just going to work our thread back, trim out any excess. Okay, so for our next step here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to tie in our UTC Ultra Wire. So today we're just going to be using small and gold. So I'm just going to take a quick piece. I'm going to tie this in here. I'm just going to tie it on our side of the shank, work it back to where we've tied in our tail. Next we're going to be coming in with our dubbing. We're just going to be using Hareline Hare's ear. We're just going to dub this onto our thread here. Just create a little bit of a taper in our dubbing noodle, and we're going to dub that just about to the bead. We're going to leave a little bit of room for our peacock. Now we're going to come back with our wire here, and we're just going to wrap this. If you have a rotary function, you can use that. If not, it's not too difficult to just wrap it by hand. For this, we're just going to helicopter that off. Now we're ready to tie in our peacock. So I'm just going to take about 3 strands here. Typically I like to tie them in from the butts. It's just a little bit stronger. Sometimes they're very brittle. So I'm going to take about an inch and a half off of those just to even them out in place. So tie those just behind our bead. Get those nice and secure. And I'm actually going to leave my thread here. So as I wrap, sometimes they'll want to jump out. Leaving your thread there just helps them hold them in place. So tie those just behind our bead. These guys I'll trim off. Sometimes you can rip them out and they'll break just like wire. Just for durability, I don't necessarily like to. So for our soft tackle, we're just going to be using a India hen in natural. I like this. It's got a nice little barring, natural modeling. Looks very good on this fly. So I'm just going to take out a feather here, and I'm just going to strip off all of those little fluffy fibers on the bottom. Now we're going to leave just for our hackle pliers. It makes it a lot easier just to wrap this feather. So we're just going to tie this in from the tip. So now that we've got our tip separated here, I'm actually going to cut it out, and it creates a little bit of a triangle, which just helps in tying this in. So now that we've got our feather ready to tie in, again we're just going to go right behind our bead, secure it with a couple good wraps, grab our hackle plier. Before I do this, I'm just going to stroke the fibers back, so when we wrap this, nothing's going to get too trapped. Sometimes all it takes is one or two. Get a secure wrap on the stem. Stroke the fibers back. Trim off the excess. And we're just going to whip finish. Get our whip finish tool, do about a 3 or 4 turn whip finish, not to crowd the bead. Make sure that is nice and tight. Snip off our excess thread. Now the last thing we can do is just add a little bit of UV resin. Just helps with the overall durability of this fly, so it is never a bad idea. Just going to add a quick drop at the top, coming with our UV light. Just make sure it's nice and cured. And that is a finished Guide's Choice Hare's Ear variant.